it's 6 o'clock, and I know it's breakfast time over in London, Alexandra. So let's get this underway, and let me firstly welcome everyone to We Need Conflict Resolution for the Future of Biodiversity Conservation. And we're lucky to have Dr. Alexandra Zimmermann joining us today. And I'm going to hand over shortly to Peter Korn, who will moderate for us. And but firstly, I'd like to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which we all are present. And I won't go into them because we're from quite diverse areas around Australia, but that's our past, present and emerging leaders. And also I'd like to acknowledge that we are a part, Mediation Beyond Borders is part of an international organisation, and we're an affiliate in Oceania. And this group collective around the globe works in conflict resolution, conflict engagement, and basically we strive for a more peaceable world, I think is the way we work. But on that note, can I hand over to Peter and ask Peter to welcome and introduce Alexandra.
Thanks, Ken, and welcome, Alex. I'm very honoured to welcome Alex today to give a talk to this group of dispute resolution specialists, I could say, who are very interested in what Alex has to introduce to us. Alex is a senior research fellow and associate director at the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit at the University of Oxford. And there she leads a group of doctoral and postdoctoral researchers carrying out interdisciplinary studies on human-wildlife conflict. Alex has a remarkable background in which she has contrived a specialization in human-wildlife conflict over many years, not through purely academic studies, but through a lot of practical work. And she has been associated with Chester Zoo as head of conservation there for 20 years. And she integrates a lot of the research together with practical studies at Chester Zoo and around the world. For example, she's done spatial modeling of elephant crop breeding in Assam. She's researched perceptions about fruit bats in Mauritius. She's done empirical studies of conflicts about jaguars across 17 countries of Latin America. The list is virtually endless about all of the different studies, and no person is better placed to talk with the benefit of very deep experience as Alex about this topic. Alex also has been very active in contriving global guidelines about human-wildlife conflict. She's chair of the IUCN SSC Human-Wildlife Conflict Task Force, and she's created HWC Online Library, which is the most comprehensive resource on the topic. The guidelines that I mentioned are the IUCN Guidelines on Human-Wildlife Conflict, which is a global guidance and policy document, which has already been launched for field testing. So that's a very exciting development. I could really go on for half an hour about what Alex has done, but I'm sure she'd like to work it in to her presentation today. We're all very much looking forward to hearing from you, Alex, so I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, Peter. That was very detailed. Thanks. It's really nice to meet you all. It's good that we have a small group, because that way we can actually chat a little bit as well. Because I'm as eager to learn what you all are working on and your experiences and how we can bring that more into wildlife conservation. That's basically what this is about and what I've been working on in the past year. So I'm just gonna quickly try and get my presentation on there. Let's see if this works. Hopefully you can all see a slide. give me a thumbs up, somebody, Peter, if that works.
Yep, we've got it.
Yep. Okay, great. So this is interesting because I usually talk to conservation scientists about this topic, and not people who already are very, very familiar and versed and professional in conflict resolution as the wider field. So I realized last night maybe I should actually give more background on human-wildlife conflict as a topic, but I can always add that in the discussion later. But basically, what I'm getting at with this, and as Peter already said, is that basically conservation, wildlife conservation, biodiversity conservation is a hugely interdisciplinary subject. And the one thing that it is still lacking quite a lot is that element of conflict resolution, mediation, and related fields. And that's kind of the main argument here. And I don't think I need to convince you guys, but this is more a case of just giving a little bit of context of what are these issues about in this particular field. And so, as Peter said, I've been working on this for about 25 years now in various parts of the world. And my own background is initially in zoology. As so many conservation scientists, you start off in the natural sciences because that's why you're interested. You're like the animals, the wildlife, the nature. And then more and more you realize that ultimately it's all about people. And so I've gone from zoology to social sciences and then increasingly into this realm. And so what this is ultimately about is this desire, this wish from the conservation sector to achieve some sort of state of coexistence. That's the word that is buzzing around a lot right now. It's not clearly defined, but it's that sentiment of coexistence, which has this, appeal of nature and animals and people all living side by side. And of course, that is extremely difficult. And so this goes really high level now. You hearing in the language of UN treaties, of UN reports, you're hearing the words harmony and peace and so on, to the point where, for example, the UNEP has a large report that's called Making Peace with Nature. You hear the Secretary General of the UN in presentations talking about being at war with nature. This is kind of language that's starting to appear. And even if, hang on, is this working? Yeah. So there's the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, which is kind of the sister treaty to the climate treaty, which focuses on biodiversity. And its vision is living in harmony with nature. So even at that very high level, this is the kind of desire, the ambition. And yet, if we're seeing these words around harmony, peace, even war, and so on, what we're not seeing in the field yet is, a really focused understanding and effort to make that happen. So instead, what we have is a huge amount of disharmony in nature conservation, the destruction of forests, of habitat. There's a lot of just anger between different groups and sectors. There's a lot of disagreement about what should be done. And then there's this classic case of direct clashes between biodiversity, in this case, iconic wildlife, and people just clashing and coming into really quite warlike situations. And so this field has, over the last decades, evolved to become very interdisciplinary. It's now no longer natural sciences, it's social sciences, it's economics, it's everything. The piece that is very much still missing is the field of conflict studies. And so what I'm always suggesting to the conservation sector, more so than your sector, is that we really need to quickly figure out how we're going to build some capacity in this field in conservation worldwide, because it's needed worldwide. So the kinds of conflicts that we're talking about here, for example, are classic conflicts around areas, protected areas. For example, often the communities that live on the peripheries of national parks are the most marginalized, and there are really basic issues around who gets to access resources, who gets the benefits, and so on. Is it the fancy hotel, or is it the local people? Those kinds of clashes are very common. You also get clashes around values. If you think about trophy hunting, for example, this is an extraordinarily hot and polarized issue where there are those who feel that animals should not be killed and hunted. Absolutely not. It's an emotional issue. And then there are those who feel that there are rational reasons, economic reasons for doing so. This is a very, very polarized and angry issue at the moment. And this is, of course, about emotions, beliefs, values, and so on. You also get clashes when you have refugee crisis and perhaps also climate crisis, climate refugees, where wildlife, biodiversity, and humans are just physically overlapping to an extent where it creates a lot of conflict. These are pictures from Kutupalong on the Myanmar-Bangladesh border, where you had in 2018 this refugee crisis, and suddenly a settlement of almost 1 million people popped up in the middle of what was forest, what was used by elephants. And of course, then you create all sorts of dilemmas because there are needs on all sides. And how do you work with that? And in conservation, we're really at all at the moment to know how to go about this. So then there's this classic topic, which I've personally worked on for a very long time, as Peter introduced, which is generally called human-wildlife conflict. That name itself is a bit problematic because it suggests that the conflict is between humans and wildlife. And to a certain extent it is, but it also isn't. And that's one of the kind of conceptual challenges in the field right now. So what you're dealing with here is a range of things. It actually occurs in every country of the world, that we know, but it can be anything from some fishing issues to elephants, basically anything that can cause damage to people's property, livelihoods, crops, or pose some sort of real or imagined threat gets entangled in this issue. The very classic and intractable version of it is around wolves in North America and in much of Europe. And it's really apparent here that this conflict is no longer about whether or not wolves eat your sheep. It is about farmers feeling all sorts of things, but it's about different sectors of society at odds with each other about various issues, and there's an animal in the middle. And I'll get more into that in a minute. So this kind of human-wildlife conflict in the worst-case scenario is actually not really about wildlife. It's about identity, and it's about divisions and polarization. And so what I'm trying to impress here, and particularly when I talk to conservation scientists about this, is that what keeps coming up is all these issues that basically are not really in the realm of natural science or data or technology. These are issues that we need other kinds of expertise for, and we can't really just solve them through science. And human-wildlife conflict, and please let me know if you want me to go more into the background on this, but I would argue this is when you get human-wildlife conflict, when you get people really directly clashing with wildlife, it is a really stark alarm that there's a lot more going on underneath that is unresolved. And so it is kind of the hot issue that points to deeper conflicts in biodiversity conservation. And so, as I mentioned, this is an issue for every country in the world, a range of species, a range of kinds of communities. Just think about elephants. There are 50 countries in the world that have elephants, 37 in Africa and 13 in Asia. Every single one of those countries is really struggling with this issue. If you have elephants in your country, you have a major concern. And it doesn't even matter how many there are. Even countries that have very small elephant populations, the governments are struggling and the communities are really struggling to coexist with these guys. And that's why it's popping up now in global agendas of biodiversity. And it is absolutely not a global South issue. This is, throughout Europe, for example, there's a lot of rewilding effort, and there's carnivores naturally coming back, a lot of wolves, bears, lynx, and so on. And these are just simply pretty difficult to live with, and people are worried. And so this is rapidly turning into quite alarmingly intractable conflicts already. And so these are just issues that go far beyond what the scientific community can deal with. What we also see is that when we have a success in conservation, success as it would be called by a conservation scientist, which is populations returning. For example, Nepal has managed to more than double its tiger population. Tigers are a hugely endangered species. But to just double your tiger population, you can imagine immediately what that means for people who live anywhere near where tigers live. So that you get these emerging conflicts. And what we're not at all doing yet in the field is preventing human wildlife conflict. It's still in this phase of trying to figure out how to firefight the crises. There's a little bit of awareness around preventing human wildlife conflicts, but the resources, both in terms of capacity and classic resources, are really not there. And so the key thing to always try and explain to people, but I think for this audience, you'll intuitively get this immediately, is that human wildlife conflict, as it's called, there is an interaction between wildlife or biodiversity and people. If there isn't an issue. But actually the conflict, the disputes, the disagreements are between the different groups of people involved. It is not this bilateral situation where you have a wild cat and a farmer and they're clashing. There's always lots of other stakeholders involved, and they are disagreeing about what should be done. And so really so most of these human wildlife conflicts are being treated as though it's only about the farmer and the cat, and they're not being treated as though there's a lot of associated conflicts around that are basically shaping what happens. And so the vast majority of interventions focus on physical solutions, practical solutions. If you take the elephant example, which is the classic human wildlife conflict concern, the classic intervention is to put up a fence or a barrier or repellent of some sort. And now the thing where it gets really confusing is that sometimes that works. And sometimes it works a little bit and then it doesn't. And sometimes it absolutely backfires. It creates anger and all sorts. And so one of the things I've worked on with colleagues over the last few years is trying to really break down why that is and come up with some conceptual crutches for understanding why does it work sometimes, why does it not, and how do you figure it out as quickly as possible? And then what do you do about it? And so what we came up with a while back with a colleague of mine, Brian McQuinn, who's a peace builder by profession, was a concept of different levels. And I'm sure you have parallels of this in your field, which basically tries to convey that all the human wildlife conflicts are pretty complicated, but why is it that some are much more intractable and complicated than others? And this is basically, it's just a conceptual model. So it's just trying to help break down the complexity of it. And we're basically saying that at the tip of the iceberg, at a level 1, you have a fairly classic dispute-like situation where there is some disagreement between those involved about something that is being damaged. And then there's a level 2, we call it, where there are underlying issues. Now, those are most commonly created through history, so a recurring of issues that have not been resolved satisfactorily by those involved, or perceived as not being resolved. And so you get a buildup of resentment. And then worst case scenario, that's left to fester and it starts to go into identities. And so if those involved, for example, the farmers or others, start to feel that they are being threatened in their identity as, or their multiple identities as farmers, whatever, then what you're really dealing with is identity-based conflict, frankly. So you're no longer going to be able to fix that with putting up a fence. In fact, that's where it can backfire. And so what we're trying to get conservation scientists to understand is how to quickly pick up on the symptoms. Now, if you those who are immersed in a situation, they get it intuitively, but it helps to just give them some kind of symptoms to look for. And so the idea here being that if you have a fairly simple human-wildlife conflict, what you're going to hear and see and observe is that the people living near the wildlife have, they want a practical solution. They're willing to do something to work with you. They're open to receiving help. But if there's more going on, and if there's a history in a sort of level 2 situation, that starts to be expressed in frustrated language, deliberately exaggerating incidences. There's resentment, there's a history, there's an expectation, there's calls for compensation, there's wariness, and so on. And then in that level 3 situation, if you're hearing extremely strong language, very negative or polarized, you know, you guys never listen to us, all that kind of typical angry language, and hostility, outright anger, even in rare cases, expressions of violence, then obviously you're dealing with it. And so the situation we have in conservation at the moment is that kind of level 1 calls for practical solutions, but levels 2 and 3 call for conflict resolution. And basically, the vast majority of conservation efforts focus on the level 1, but the vast majority of situations are actually level 2 and worsening. So we have this complete mismatch of an understanding of what approaches are needed for what kind of diagnosis, basically. And really, and that's partly because you know, a shortage of understanding, but also a real shortage of capacity. Conservation scientists are not classically trained in conflict resolution, and this is where we need to talk later about where can some collaborations happen. And so what I try and explain to conservation scientists usually is that when you're dealing with the level 1 issue, you're pretty lucky because there are practical solutions. You can do things like reduce risk and diversify income sources and put up fences. And so this is really about dealing with the issue. If you find yourself having a level 2 issue, then really this is about repairing relationships. And the efforts need to, first of all, go into parties, for example, farmers or whoever is affected, having a chance to be heard and taken seriously, to try and mediate and repair relationships between key stakeholders and actually bring up some of that history and discuss it. So this takes you very much more into the realm of mediation skills. And in that level 3, that's then very advanced conflict resolution skills that is needed, because this is about reconciling polarized views and deep divisions and lack of trust, and where you need entirely different approaches that you guys will be familiar with. So there, the focus has to be on process. Forget the fence. Don't even talk about a fence. It will only offend and make it worse. This is what I'm trying to explain to conservation scientists. So, yeah, so that's kind of the 3-level conceptual tool that tries to get some of these ideas across. And so what we're dealing with here is you can get, it is really quite perplexing. You can get, for example, human-wildlife conflicts where, this is a picture from Assam, where this is on the side with a lady, and that house has been destroyed by elephants. And yet there is a remarkably high tolerance of elephants in this community. And so there, of course, you're dealing with situations where a practical solution like a fence can help a lot. But then you have, and the example at the top is one where these communities are below poverty line. Then you have farmers, say in Europe and North America, where this is not about poverty. It is about their life and their lifestyles and their identity, and the fact that wolves and everything that a wolf symbolizes feels threatening. And the picture at the bottom is from just a few months ago in Spain. And this is a case where farmers killed wolves and put the heads of the wolves on the steps of the police station. And you will intuitively understand what that means. That is an extreme expression of anger. It's the conservation form of violence, if you will, to say this is not okay with us. And so of course, forget talking about fences here. So again, if you superimpose our concept onto that, it starts to point towards that if you are dealing with the tip of the iceberg, negotiation skills will get you there. In the middle band, we really need mediation, and at the worst case scenario level, we need even more advanced skills around conflict transformation. And so really what I'm trying to get at here is that if we don't start to see what's going on under that level one, we're going to crash our dear conservation boat into some serious problems. We need to be really asking ourselves whether we're solving the right problems. We need to become better at diagnosing what is going on and then bringing conflict resolution tools into this. And my concern is really that if you take one of those classic conflict progression cycles where you have escalation and then you have de-escalation, this is what it would look like if you had conflict professionals involved. You could bring a human-wildlife conflict back down to normality. But what's happening in conservation is they're just going through the roof. And my real worry is that we don't have, conservation is a very poor, resource poor field. And so what would it cost to prevent these human-wildlife conflicts? What would it cost to deal with them as they emerge? And then what if you end up with a lot of identity-based conflict in biodiversity? This field, this conservation field, cannot deal with it. That we do not have the resources to do it. And so just if there's any economic argument for why we need to bring conflict resolution into skills and capacity into conservation and biodiversity, I would say this is it, because we can't afford not to, literally. Right, so to conclude, my argument is that we really need this. It's urgent. What I would like to see is that conflict resolution, and I use the word in the broadest sense. I know it's not the most precise because there's lots of different approaches and concepts behind this, but that this is brought into conservation training as routine, that we find ways to work with the mediation sector and conflict professionals to collaborate on working together on this, because no one can be an expert in all these different fields. And that basically most biodiversity projects and strategies start to really incorporate this seriously into their efforts. Okay, and so in terms of progress, what we now have is in that global biodiversity framework of the UN, this is now explicitly in the new treaty that was signed off in Montreal at COP15 in December last year. And so the specialist group that Peter kindly mentioned briefly, just to, if you want to know more about what's done there, that is what we focus on. So this is a technical advisory group of the World Conservation Union, and our whole aim is to kind of gather this interdisciplinary knowledge, build capacity, and we're doing that through these things that Peter mentioned, including the guidelines. And I think I'm going to screenshot. Yeah, so we have a library, a very comprehensive library on this whole topic. It's used in pretty much every country. We ran the first ever major conference on this just a few months ago, and we'll be doing that again in a few years. And these are these guidelines. They are not just about conflict resolution, they are about the entire field of human-wildlife conflict. And every angle of it has 32 chapters on every possible angle. Feel free to have a look. We're just translating into 6 languages right now. And that's it. I'll leave you with those coordinates and look forward to chatting and hearing your reactions to some of these ideas. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Alex. I'm sure that's going to provoke a lot of discussion now. And hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about activities that we've been engaged in and relate it back to what you're talking about, and actually talk about some practical approaches to resolving the sorts of conflicts in your area that we've been observing. When you mentioned elephants and the sorts of conflicts that have been arising about elephants, it brought to mind the very well documented case in China. I think it was about 18 months ago, about the elephants that started wandering from Sichuanbana in Yunnan province and actually went on their way and wandered, I think it must have been almost 1,000 kilometers to close to Kunming in China. And the approach that was taken then, it sort of caused a crisis of sorts because it brought the issue of wildlife-human conflict to the fore. A huge discussion on the social media in China. In the end, basically the elephants were allowed to wander, and there's been a policy actually of compensating farmers and villagers who did suffer damage because of that event. So while it has been difficult for a lot of people, combined with education, there seems to be a level of understanding and I think tolerance that has become a little bit more entrenched now in that region. I think mainly because of the monetary compensation that's been made available to people that are affected. Alex, I mean, in one aspect that we have tend to deal with is dispute system design. And it seems that in those level 3 conflicts that you're talking about, just to get to the bottom of it and solve something which is essentially very intractable, it seems that forging a way to actually work through problems as they happen is very important, and getting some basic agreement that there is an issue and that we have to have some sort of consensus about the process. Has there been any successful case to date where in those level 3 issues that such a process has been put into place?
It hasn't been done a lot. Because this is just so beyond the realm of most of the bulk of conservation work that is done. But there's very, very few people in the world who work on this. There have been some efforts to bring mostly conflict transformation. That's the most popular approach here that conservationists have jumped onto. And for most, that's also very woolly and vague and not clear what that means. But that has, yes, I'm trying to think now of specific cases. I'm going to have to think harder. But I know that it's a drop in the ocean of what's needed. But it's beginning, basically. And also when you deal with any conservation actors who are in the middle of these very intractable situations, they don't know what more to do. There's that sort of bring me anything that might work here. So there's certainly a need and an openness to trying some new things. But there's really across the field a need to change the understanding. For example, that there you really need to talk about process. And as you said, first of all, figuring out the process and designing it in a way that is appropriate for each unique situation. There's a wish to be able to just copy and paste stuff and shortcut. And that's the problem. What we're trying to kind of educate on, especially with these guidelines also, that you cannot take something that works in one part of even your own country and take it 100 miles down the road and expect it to work there. And that's a challenge for scaling, because then how are you going to solve all these millions of conflicts? But also it's frustrating. It's hugely frustrating for governments, but also for scientists who need to address a large volume of cases.
Yeah, you mentioned that dispute resolution specialists have not had the awareness or the incentive maybe to become very visible and active in this area. I thought that is a really good reason why you should be speaking to us today, because a lot of us are dispute resolution specialists. I was wondering what you would like to see happen for dispute resolution specialists to really start to make a contribution to this area.
Yeah, I mean, that's been, I think, just a function of awareness of, there comes a point where in your sector you realize that you need to collaborate with a different sector. And once that gains a critical mass, then first you get individuals in that sector reaching out to others, as we're doing here. But for that to become quite at scale, then that needs to be a wider understanding. So I think with time that will come, but it's these kinds of conversations that are really starting to happen, and they're very important. Now, there's some little barriers to those kinds of new collaborations, but they're not really a problem to overcome. But one of those is language, for example. So we have our language, you guys have your language, and we need to actually understand some of those terms and what we're talking about. Then also conceptually, we go about things differently. So the natural sciences love very structured, reliable concepts. And when things get too vague, or they might call it fluffy or something, then they're lost, and it puts them off, and vice versa, right? So it's these the communication first needs to be established. And before that, just even an interest in the other sector, and then realization for the values of bringing them together. It takes a little time, but I think we should make a start.
I know a number of my colleagues have been involved tangentially in the wildlife sector, particularly related to Indigenous communities as well. I think that relates back to interactions with wildlife. I wonder if any of us could speak to that, particularly in Australia or the South Pacific Islands where we've been involved. Maybe Ken, you'd like to start?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And Alexandra, thank you very much for what is really interesting from my point of view. Just picking up on some of the thoughts that you expressed, I'm engaged in this area in Australia, where the level of dispute that we're dealing with is what I think you defined as level 2. But one of the areas that I'm involved in on a regular basis is in the water space, and I'm involved with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority at a community level and at a greater level. And it's a challenge there. All of the things that you mentioned are a challenge in that. I mean, firstly, you are talking of what is, it's a water-based basin for which we've got an enduring conflict which is really basically what you'd call the tension of coexistence between nature, humanity, economics, and then overlaying or underlaying that is the cultural differences. So our First Nations community think about it differently than we do. The farmers, who are really very astute on the use of water, think about it differently. And then there's a greater community which they just know that it's a place they go and visit. Now, with all of that preamble, what is really interesting is the point you made is actually there isn't a huge amount of skill developed in the conflict resolution space in handling this issue and this area. So the battles go on all from our own needs, our own perspective. Now, I guess, having said that, question I have is, and Peter and I have tried to do this in the past as well, which is what sort of skills do we need to develop? And issue, like you mentioned, resources, but what sort of skills do we need to develop to be able to get this conversation and our cohort of the conflict engagement professionals sort of aware and up the curve?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and just you mentioning water conflicts, I mean, it's not just, there's so many conflicts around the environment and beyond, and definitely not enough mediators and professionals to go around. So I think the very first step is and I can just speak for the sector that I'm immersed in biodiversity conservation, but the first step is an appreciation and an awareness of that there's these kinds of conflicts and that they are shaping where conservation goes, and then an appreciation for the potential that there's other areas and specialisms out there that can help. And then that creates that first step to wanting to reach out and collaborate. And then we go down the classic route of let's learn from each other and figure out how this might be done. And of course, it's enormously difficult. The case you just described briefly, I mean, there's thousands, millions of cases around the world. And your field also is still figuring out how to deal with many of these. So there's no shortage of need for sure.
Well, again, I'll be quiet in a minute, but specifically, I mean, you don't have to be. Only 2 or 3 years ago, we had something like 1 million cod die because of the climate issues that are surrounding them. And there is something like 10 endangered species just in the riparian environment, forgetting the greater and broader environment around there. And the communication, our challenge, I think, is communication. That's getting people to understand the other's perspective. And part of the issue also, I have to say, is that the population doesn't put a value on some of these species. Now, the fishermen do when the fish die, but when your frogs start to disappear and the quolls start to get trouble and all this and the platypus disappear, everyone doesn't really take any notice until it's too late.
Right, but there are some who do take notice, and that's the conservation sector. And
yes.
And they are also then not feeling heard, and that adds to it all. So so I guess whatever lens you're looking through, whether it's through conservation or fisheries or indigenous rights or whatever, you're looking mostly at the issue through your lens, and you think that that is the most important way to look at it. And actually, it's so many things. So this is where that third party impartial element is needed to guide those conversations actually into something constructive. So this is exactly your realm. This is where we need to build up. I don't know how exactly, but we can explore this. Build up that first of all, understanding that some impartial outside help is needed, but then how do you access it? How do you get it? How do you resource it? And so on.
Claire, I'd like to ask you maybe to pitch in, because I know you were on a mission to the Solomon Islands some time ago, dealing with conflicts involving Indigenous communities. I'm sure you dealt with the issue of communication there. Wonder if you've got any insights as to how to overcome this barrier.
Actually, my question before was going to be to put it back on Alexandra, because I think as you've just described, some of the key issues are around that awareness and appreciation of multidisciplinary skill sets and how complementary they are actually when working together. And so I guess increasing that awareness that having multidisciplinary teams can actually bring, a lot more positive results. And that conflict resolution is a specific skill set that's relevant to the different realms, like, the conservation, as you've highlighted, the animal welfare, diversity, fisheries. I think one challenge, and you did also just highlight this, is recognizing the cost associated with having additional people come onto the team, because often a lot of these projects tend to be funded by funding bodies or by volunteer organizations, or they have very limited budgets. And also, as soon as you do engage a conflict specialist, often the timeline of what people suggest is achievable it gets expanded out because the project says, great, we want you in there and we want you to produce these outputs in 3 months. And someone will come in and go, well, actually, I think we should probably have some conversations. We should get to know them. We should engage with the community. How about we try and do this over 1 or 2 years? So there's often that clash of the disciplines. Yeah. So I don't know if in your experience, you know, if you have any suggestions for how we can, I guess, sell that or frame ourselves as being useful when those challenges appear.
Absolutely, that's so spot on. And again, I'm going to talk only about the conservation lens on this, but I think it's absolutely parallel in other sectors, say sustainable development or climate projects or whatever. But basically, what we need to see in the conservation sector is a complete shift in the culture, also of the funding. And so, yes, funders, we tend to have the classic kind of 3-year grants where you're supposed to deliver impact, whatever that is. They want impact. They don't just want outputs. They want actual change. They want to see your theory of change. And often these theories of change are completely mismatched. So in human wildlife conflict, for example, often what's promised to the funder is that coexistence will be created. And then the activities at the other end just absolutely don't align. They are very practical. It's about changing some attitudes or maybe protecting some livestock. And in no way does that actually guarantee coexistence, because coexistence is a much deeper thing, right? So there's this fundamental, it's 2 ways. It's both a lack of understanding and capacities of those doing the project, but it's also the funding sector is just not helping here by putting demands on, and ultimately you design your project a little bit according to what the funder wants. So I'm very interested in trying to speak to some of the foundations and the funding to say, listen, you got to start making conditions here. If you insist on, a phase of learning and listening, for example, before you give the funding, or if you insist on there has to be a conflict specialist as part of the core team, then the projects will do that because they have to. They want your funding, right? So that's a really important point. But this is a slow change. It's a cultural change in how we do things. But it does happen. So I've seen it. So I've worked a lot with, for example, UK government funding called Darwin grants. And in the old days, it was very, well, let's just say it has shifted from that you have to now show that you have livelihoods, expertise, and you have to, in your team, you have to put budget aside for monitoring, evaluation, and so on. These are things that weren't there 10 years ago. So if the funders start to do this, the field follows. And I think so that's quite a strategic entry point for us, and probably transferable to your sector as well. We need to have those conversations also with those influencers. And I think we will get there, but this is going to take some time. This is a decade of badgering people, which I'm ready for. So,
Alex, do you think it's a step up, and there's a lot more prospect for better and more informed funding now that it's included in COP15? I mean, to dispute wildlife or ecosystem human disputes.
So COP15 itself, so the fact that it is in Target 4 now explicitly is a huge step forward, and it has cost me and the team, a lot of sleepless nights, and we got there in the end. But it now means that every country has to take this seriously. That then means they're going to have to think about how they do it, and that then means they will look for resources. And if those resources start to become better at advocating and showing how to create systematic change, to really look at the system, not just the symptoms at the top. So it's this whole chain of effects that starts, well, in different places, but one starting point is the UN intergovernmental kind of pressure. And then it becomes about implementation. So we need to strategically look at this along the whole chain. And then at some point, people will say, well, we don't have mediators. Where do we find them? Where are they? I don't know any. and that's where I go, hang on, okay, let's find some, let's create some collaboration, or let's find people who are interested in the subject and want to help out there.
That was actually going to be a question again, Alexandra, because part of what Mediators Beyond Borders Oceania is hoping to do is bring people together who have an interest in this sector, but also to support each other in building capacity and skills and knowledge, and sharing that then through training and education. For example, in the conflict management resolution sector in Australia, as it was just starting out, our mediation training, consists of a 5-day face-to-face training in the classroom, and then you can go for an accreditation weekend and wham, bam, you're a mediator. But that's obviously quite different to people who have like a long-term education and deep understanding of conflict and skills and things that are related. So what do you think the sector will be looking for in a conflict specialist, if they're inviting people onto the types of projects that you're describing?
Yeah, I think the vast majority don't know what they're looking for, actually. So there's a lot of first introduction to the idea. And so what I'm actually, and I think there's a lot of, as you said earlier, there aren't resources necessarily to start bringing in mediators who want to create long processes, not quick fixes. So the first question is, what can we teach conservation scientists, for example, as sort of first aid? What can they themselves do, at least to de-escalate or to prevent things getting out of control, or just teach them how to appreciate or identify what's going on? And then how do we teach them? We're not going to turn them all into mediators. Some of them might want to, and I know I have a lot of colleagues who've gone and taken mediation training just out of interest. They're not going to suddenly become mediators, but they wanted to an appreciation of what it involved. And that's a good sign. And so if we create this sort of almost spectrum of expertise, starting with appreciation and all the way to actual skills of being a third party and intervening, it's all about capacity building across the board. So yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that we're probably still just in the awareness raising phase. So having maybe a lot more opportunities to talk to the fact that these skills are needed, talk to what the difference might have been if someone had been involved in a project that had these skills. I liked your economic arguments, because at the end of the day, if people see figures and go, oh, it will cost me less if I de-escalate at that point.
Yeah, at some point. But these are, that was a hypothetical graph. I'd love to actually, have a student or somebody who actually calculates that. But in terms of training and so on, I'm developing a course right now with Oxford. It's kind of an executive education 4-day course, which is targeted at the conservation audiences and starting to introduce all these ideas to them. And people do ask, what kind of courses are there that are relatable to that audience? Because a conservation scientist is going to look at some civic mediation training course and go, I don't really know whether this is right for me. So you see, need some more tailored products. So we need to develop those. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. I wouldn't mind asking Alexandra if she's had any experience with anything in Australia at all.
Personally, no. I have not yet had the fortune of visiting your faraway, beautiful country. But I have a lot of colleagues who do work there, and there's some really, really interesting work on sharks, in fact, in Queensland, where they're treating. I have some colleagues who are working on dealing with the trauma of shark attacks through communication with the affected communities and parties, and helping them process it. And that in conservation is a really novel way of going about it. It's not saying, here's why sharks are ecologically important and why, sorry, your brother got bitten, but we need to protect them. It's taking a different approach of actually listening to communities and so on. So there are some really nice examples.
Where
then
I
I think
live,
it's
oh, sorry.
right.
Just going to say where I live, there's a lot of, has been traditionally, a lot of vacant land and bushland. I'm outside of Brisbane, about 25, 30 kilometres, but there's a lot of bushland that's just being raised very, very quickly for new development. So kangaroos and koalas in particular, but wombats and platypus habitats and all the rest of it are all being affected. And even to the point of rabbits that are banned in Queensland but still are popping up. Foxes coming more into suburbia, then being, a lot of them are being hit by trucks and even normal cars, and yeah, and they're coming out looking for food and water, and they've got nowhere to live. I don't see very many active, I know they're around because I do see some information from them, but I don't see a lot of activity as such from any of the conservation groups. So I'm not sure where that's at in Australia.
Gosh, I'm not an expert exactly on what's going on in the region. I could put you in touch with colleagues who know more. But it sounds very much like too many cases, not enough resources, probably. Or prioritization from whoever are the decision makers of where you invest your conservation interventions. Whether that's government or it's just NGOs trying to figure out where to go. And yeah.
There's a lot of comment on social media from just the general public when we get a new announcement that, you know, that another 20,000 acres is being raised and bulldozed, but it's usually too little too late. You know, we don't know about these things until it's happening or about to happen, and then it's just too late to do anything. And you know, and they, yeah, so I'm a bit lost as to where do we go, but I'm just wondering if there's a role for MBBO in any of it.
I think it's just engaging with the issues, and especially if it's one you care about, just reaching out to them and saying, hey, you know, can we talk about this? Can we help offer support in whatever way? It's not often rejected, I think, if you offer some kind of help.
Peter, if I can make an observation, and I know we're running close to the end of time, so I apologise for that. But one of the things that occurs, I live very close to a national park, and one of the challenges we have, and I'm also engaged with a sustainable action group, and our challenge, of course, in the sustainable action network, you get people who are passionate about the animals and the environment, and their communication skills are not the best. And I think that's really the point you're making, Alexandra, which is, and so they tend to end up being polarizing. You know, so down in our area, you've got problems with feral animals who are actually damaging the native flora and particularly fauna. So cats are a massive problem in the region. Pigs are a massive problem in the region. Foxes are a massive problem in the region. And we all get together and work, and the only time we ever come what I call hand in hand with, say, the farmers and the local community is when we agree that, you know, one feral animal has done a lot more damage to each of us and our interests. But it's, again, rounding out that point, is its communication is really the issue, and our greenies and our environmentally aware people actually haven't, and I think to your point, haven't developed the skills yet. And so maybe that's where we as a group need to help them.
I would very much agree with that.
Yeah, on that note, Alex, I think that as a result of this session, you can see yourself as a catalyst for us as a group, trying to actually apply our skills in this area and reach out now that you've given us a better awareness of what we can do in the area of ecosystem or wildlife, people, dispute resolution. it's very empowering to know that dispute resolution specialists are needed, and it is quite difficult for those in the conservation area to reach out and find us. So I think we need to be more proactive now and actually trying to integrate ourselves into the conservation movement to try and get some collaboration going in order to bring our skills to bear to help get to the bottom of all of these entrenched issues that you're talking about, especially on that level 3.
Yeah, I think, and we should, it's been really nice to have this initial chat and hear how you see this as well. And I think it would be really nice to follow up, and because as you say, even once you've got the realization, oh, we need a mediation and conflict specialist help, then the next question is always, where are they? How do I don't know, the networks aren't there. So let's start to build those integrated networks a little bit. That's going to take some time, but I think we should make a start. And
how can we do this by actually reaching out to IUCN as well? I mean, as part of that network, I mean, as the session that you chair, I mean, would we be able to help you develop a database of interested dispute resolution professionals who could get involved?
Yeah, I think those are the sorts of ideas we should start to think about, actually. And there are, IUCN is an enormous organization, and it has a lot of different specialist groups and bodies. And there are actually, in the Social Policy Commission, there are people who work in conflict and so on. But there's this huge divide between the natural science sections and then the social science sections, and they are not. So even internally, it's so vast that they aren't really all talking to each other. But if we make a start and we can focus on biodiversity and wildlife, just to narrow it down somewhere, because otherwise, you guys will be called in absolutely every dispute in the world. That's something to focus on. We can start with. So yeah, let's have some follow-up chats and see who would like to get involved.
Yeah, that seems like a great place to start. So I think we always like to come out of these sessions with some action points. And I think we've got at least 2 points. I mean, we get more proactive in reaching out and making conservation groups aware that we have these skills and we're prepared to apply them. And secondly, trying to help you establish some sort of a database to address the problem that you're talking about, to make us more readily available around the world to conservation groups.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Okay, well, we've run over time a little bit. On behalf of everybody, I want to express our deep appreciation, Alex. Today, you've opened a very important world to us, and you can see from the enthusiasm that we're very keen to get involved and share the skills that we've developed. And we want to thank you very much, especially not only for the presentation today, but for all the work that you've been doing over the years. I mean, I could only introduce a small part of it, but I'm sure everybody else is as impressed as I am with the passion and the dedication with which you're going about this very difficult task of getting people to think outside the box and create an interdisciplinary approach towards resolving these very intractable problems. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's very kind, and thanks. I'm really excited, actually. I'm grateful that you reached out to me, Peter, a few months ago, and that we're starting this conversation, and I hope there'll be many more, and really look forward to it, actually.